The gavel's strike echoed through the silent courtroom, its sound sharp and final, like the crack of a bone. Emily felt the weight of injustice crush her chest as the verdict rang in her ears. Daniel whispered, "This cannot be happening," but his words dissolved into the heavy air. Michael gripped the wooden bench, his knuckles whitening as though holding on to the last thread of reason. Outside, rain battered the windows, a furious storm mirroring their despair. The judge's words still lingered, cold and detached, slicing into their hearts with merciless authority. Emily's tears welled, but she refused to let them fall, whispering to herself, "We will fight back." The storm outside intensified, lightning splitting the sky like a wound. The air grew suffocating with grief, yet under it, a stubborn spark began to burn. Daniel clenched his jaw, silently vowing never to accept defeat. The family sat broken, yet bound together by a rising fire none could yet name. The silence after the verdict clung to the family like a shroud, each breath heavy with disbelief. Emily lowered her gaze, whispering, "They never saw the truth." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, eyes scanning the empty benches as though answers might hide in the shadows. Michael rested his hand briefly on Emily's shoulder, steady but wordless, anchoring her to reality. Thunder growled in the distance, its echoes merging with the hollow ache in their chests. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, casting an unforgiving pallor over their faces. Every sound felt louder now, every silence sharper, as though the world had shrunk to this painful stillness. Emily's hands trembled in her lap, yet beneath the trembling was a seed of defiance, a refusal to yield. Daniel's jaw tightened, his silence louder than words. Michael inhaled deeply, eyes narrowing toward the judge's empty seat. The storm outside continued to howl, a reminder that even in darkness, resistance brews. The phone rang at midnight, its shrill cry slicing through the storm's roar. Emily's hand hesitated before lifting the receiver, her voice low and guarded. A distorted voice spilled secrets that made her blood run cold. Daniel, pacing in the dimly lit room, demanded, "Who is this?" But the caller was gone before he could answer. Silence fell heavier than the storm, broken only by Emily's shaky breath. Michael, leaning against the wall, whispered, "This changes everything." The family exchanged looks, fear mingling with grim determination. The storm outside beat harder against the windows, as if echoing the urgency of the revelation. Emily's grip on the phone trembled, yet she felt something awaken within her, the spark of a fight they never asked for but could no longer refuse. In that moment, they understood the truth. Justice had been stolen, and only they could seize it back. The sound of the storm pulled Emily back to a memory she had buried deep. She stood motionless by the window, her reflection staring back like a stranger. Daniel spoke softly, "You're not alone in this," his voice a fragile lifeline. Michael sat nearby, chewing his lip in silence, eyes fixed on the floor. The memory haunted her. A night years ago, another storm, another loss. She pressed her forehead against the glass, whispering words only she could understand. The rain blurred the city lights, a canvas of grief streaked with fire. The room grew heavier, filled with ghosts of what had been taken. Daniel stepped closer, his presence steady, though unspoken doubt lingered. Emily clenched her fists, refusing to let the past consume her. The storm outside surged, as though demanding they confront the truth. In her heart, she vowed never again to let silence decide their fate. The weight of the night pressed on them until Emily finally broke the silence, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "We will fight," she said, words sharp with defiance. Daniel nodded slowly, his jaw set, eyes burning with a promise he could not yet name. Michael straightened in his seat, no longer the quiet anchor, but a soldier preparing for a battle he never wanted. The room felt smaller now, yet filled with a new energy, dangerous and alive. The storm continued to rage, but inside the family's spirit rose like fire. Their grief had been real, their despair crushing, but now it was fuel. They would not bow to injustice. They would not fade into silence. Emily's voice lingered in the air like a spark, igniting a fire that could not be extinguished. The fight had begun, and nothing could turn them back. Morning crept in with a bruised light that made the night feel unfinished. Emily turned the sealed letter over and over, as if the paper might confess. Daniel said, "You do not have to open it today." Michael said, "We just need a first step." The house smelled like old coffee and rain, a tired comfort that failed to soothe. Emily traced the crease, remembering the last time she stood at that window with hope. She said, "If the truth hurts, it still belongs to us." Daniel paced, counting breaths like he was learning to walk through fire. Michael watched the door, expecting the world to knock hard. The phone lay silent, a threat made of plastic and waiting. Emily pressed the envelope to her chest and breathed in resolve. She said, "We begin with what we have, and we keep going." Grace arrived with a calm that made the room breathe again. Grace said, "I brought notes from earlier interviews." Emily nodded, grateful but guarded, like a door on a chain. Daniel said, "Tell us what we missed." Grace spread pages across the table, each line a small lantern in fog. Michael listened, silent and steady, weighing every word like currency. Grace said, "The timeline can hold, but the motive is thin." Emily traced a name, feeling a chill that did not come from the air. She said, "He was there when the lights failed." Daniel leaned forward and met Grace's eyes. He said, "We anchor the facts, then confront the gaps." The clock clicked, ticking loud as a metronome for resolve. Grace said, "If we move as one, we will not be erased." The door burst open with a gust of wet air and a stubborn heartbeat. Leo said, "You need to see this," and set a scuffed sketchbook on the table. Emily stiffened, surprised by the sheer force of his certainty. Daniel said, "Slow down and breathe." Leo flipped to a page mapped with dates, faces, and arrows. He said, "They met 3 times after the verdict was set." Michael stepped closer, scanning the messy clarity. He said, "Where did you get these notes?" Leo looked at his shoes, then raised his chin. He said, "I listen where walls carry secrets." Grace watched him with a warmth edged by caution. Emily said, "If this is true, it changes their story." The storm outside found its echo in their blood. Pressure rose like a tide that refused the shore. Daniel said, "We need sources, not rumors." Leo flushed, but did not step back. He said, "I have more than whispers." Emily placed a palm on the sketchbook, feeling the heat of urgency. She said, "If the pattern holds, we can test it fast." Michael said, "Then we separate what is signal from the noise." Grace gathered the pages into a clean stack. She said, "I will verify every meeting and timestamp." Daniel's eyes softened, then narrowed with duty. He said, "We move careful, or they bury us again." Leo met Emily's gaze and found a home for his fire. The room aligned, a compass finally true. The plan formed in quiet sentences that felt like vows. Emily said, "Grace verifies the meetings by midnight." Daniel said, "Michael and I pull the security feeds." Leo said, "I can trace who called from the blocked number." Grace nodded, already dialing a favor owed. Michael said, "We meet back here with everything we find." The storm thinned to a hush that made each word land hard. Emily looked at them and felt the letter in her pocket like a pulse. She said, "We trust each other, and we keep records clean." Daniel stepped closer and lowered his voice. He said, "Whatever comes, we do not run." The house felt larger, like the walls had stepped back to watch them rise. The evidence surfaced like a ghost from water, only to vanish again with cruel precision. Emily said, "It was here last night," her voice sharp as glass. Daniel leaned over the laptop, scrolling through missing files. He said, "Someone erased it clean." Michael rubbed his temples, muttering, "They are always one step ahead." Grace spread out backup notes, her calm cracking at the edges. She said, "We need to check every device." Leo tapped his pen against the table, restless as a storm. He said, "I drew the room before they wiped it. The shape is still with us." Emily closed her eyes and breathed steady, refusing despair. She said, If they bury the proof, we dig harder. Thunder rolled outside like an echo of her vow. Michael stood tall, his calm presence masking the fracture inside. He said, "We cannot panic. They want us scattered." Emily clenched her fists, fire flashing in her eyes. Daniel said, "We move as one, no matter how fast they erase." Grace adjusted her notes, her voice soft but urgent. She said, "We trace their shadow, we find their hand." Leo muttered, "They will not silence me," his defiance sparking against the dark air. The room pulsed with tension, each word like a heartbeat against silence. The storm outside calmed for a moment, as though listening. Michael's gaze swept across them, anchoring their fear with his steadiness. He said, "Hold to each other, or we fall alone." Leo bristled as Daniel questioned the notes, sparks flaring between them. Daniel said, "How do we know your sketches are true?" Leo slammed the notebook shut. He said, "Because I was there when no one else listened." Emily stepped between them, her voice sharp with command. She said, "Enough, we need every angle." Michael stayed silent, watching both, calculating the cost of fractured trust. Grace said, "We cannot afford division, not now." The air thickened, heated by anger and doubt. Daniel exhaled, his jaw tight, but his words softer. He said, "Then prove me wrong." Leo's glare softened, his grip loosening on the book. He said, "I already did." The fragile unity splintered further when news struck like a blade. Grace read aloud, the witness retracted. Emily's breath caught, her world tipping. Daniel slammed his fist against the table. He said, "They forced this." Michael leaned against the wall, shoulders heavy with a silent burden. He said, "We cannot lose faith." Leo's eyes flashed as he muttered, "Someone close is feeding them." Emily whispered, "But who?" Her voice was raw, cracking under weight. Grace steadied her tone, though fear laced the edges. She said, "We cannot chase shadows, only facts." The room swirled with suspicion, the storm once outside now brewing between them. The night closed in heavy, pressing on their unity like chains. Emily said, "They want us broken, so we hold tighter." Daniel looked at her, his anger cooling into resolve. Michael said, "We carry truth, even if it weighs like stone." Grace gathered the notes with steady hands, her voice calm but edged. She said, "We rebuild with what remains." Leo stood at the window, the storm reflected in his restless eyes. He said, "They do not own my voice." Silence followed, not empty but alive with promise. Emily breathed deep, her voice a spark. She said, "Then tomorrow we strike harder, together." The storm outside broke into a steady rain, washing the night clean. The truth cracked open with the weight of a hidden past. Grace laid the file on the table, her hands trembling despite her calm voice. She said, "The witness was never who they claimed." Emily leaned closer, her breath unsteady, whispering, "What do you mean?" Daniel's eyes narrowed, scanning the pages lined with falsified records. He said, "This is a double life exposed." Michael folded his arms, his jaw tight, muttering, "They built the case on a lie." Leo stepped forward, his young voice shaking but strong. He said, "I sketched his face from memory. It matches the name in here." The room pulsed with disbelief and dread. Grace's tone grew firm as she said, "Everything shifts now, and the shadows grow closer." The betrayal came from within the circle they trusted most. Emily's voice broke as she said, "He was family to us." Daniel slammed the table, his rage vibrating through the wood. He said, "He fed them everything." Michael leaned back in his chair, eyes shadowed with regret. He whispered, "I should have seen it sooner." Grace placed a hand on the papers, her calm a thin shield. She said, "This wound is meant to break us." Leo's voice pierced through, sharp and unforgiving. He said, "Then we do not let him win." The silence that followed was jagged, filled with sorrow and fury. Emily steadied herself, her voice steel beneath the tremor. She said, "We fight harder, even if the betrayal cuts deep." The velvet blade revealed himself with the poise of a predator. Richard stood in the chamber, his voice calm and cutting. He said, "Truth is a matter of who holds the pen." Emily froze, her chest tightening as memories flooded. Daniel growled, "You twist the world to your favor." Richard's smile was cold, eyes sharp as steel. He said, "I shape memory, and memory shapes the law." Grace whispered, "This is his design all along." Michael shifted uneasily, the weight of betrayal anchoring him in silence. Leo muttered, "He has lied for years, and they believed him." Richard's gaze swept the room, his stillness more threatening than motion. Emily's voice shook but held. She said, "Your hold ends here." The haunting memory rose like a ghost demanding justice. Emily stood alone in the darkened hall, fingers tracing faded photographs. She whispered, "I see you still," her voice breaking. Daniel stepped into the frame, hesitant but steady. He said, "The past does not own you." Michael watched silently, his presence grounding her in the moment. Grace lingered near the doorway, offering quiet strength. The storm outside cracked, illuminating the photo with brutal light. Leo's voice drifted from behind, quiet but firm. He said, "The memory connects us all." Emily pressed her forehead against the frame, tears blurring her sight, but her voice grew stronger. She said, "This memory will no longer chain us. It will free us." The revelation shattered their world, yet forged their unity. Grace said, "The case was never about law, it was built on control." Daniel said, "And Richard wielded it like a weapon." Michael's voice was low, but firm. He said, "Then we break the weapon, piece by piece." Leo's eyes blazed as he declared, "We expose him, every lie, every mask." Emily stood straighter, her fear carved into defiance. She said, "Then tonight we stop being victims." The storm outside subsided into a steady rain, cleansing the night. Their grief transformed into resolve, their doubts into fire. Daniel whispered, "This is our chance." Emily looked at each of them and said, "Together, we take back the truth." The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, the tension a living thing pressing against every wall. Emily gripped her folder, whispering, "We are ready." Daniel's gaze swept the room, sharp as steel. He said, "This is where we stand or fall." Michael adjusted his tie, his face calm but his hands betraying a tremor. Grace leaned close, her voice steady. She said, "Stay on the facts, no matter the noise." Leo shifted in his seat, eyes burning with restless fire. He said, "They will hear the truth, even if it scorches." The judge entered, silence swallowing every sound. Emily's heart pounded like a drum of war, but her voice, when it came, was clear. She said, "This is our moment, and we will not be silenced." The comforter's mask slipped beneath the weight of truth. Grace whispered, "He is unraveling," her eyes fixed on the witness stand. Daniel leaned forward, muttering, "Push harder." Emily stood firm, her words sharp and unyielding. She said, "You swore under oath, yet your story bends with the wind." The man faltered, sweat on his brow, eyes darting. Michael said, "He cannot hold it much longer." Leo slammed his sketchbook onto the table. He said, "This proves your lies." The courtroom gasped, whispers rippling like wildfire. The witness stammered, his voice cracking. Emily's gaze pierced him like a blade. She said, "Your silence speaks louder than your words ever could." The steady anchor revealed his hidden role with quiet devastation. Michael's voice was low, almost a whisper. He said, "I signed the paper that gave them leverage." Emily's eyes widened, disbelief stabbing deep. She said, "You knew." Daniel's face tightened, fury and sorrow colliding. He said, "You betrayed us for what?" Michael's gaze dropped, shame shadowing his face. He whispered, "I thought it was for the greater good." Grace's voice broke through, soft but searing. She said, "You broke the chain of trust." Leo stood frozen, his voice cracking. He said, "You were our shield." Silence filled the courtroom, heavy as stone. Emily straightened, her voice cold. she said. Then you must answer to us and to the truth. The confession came in private, a moment stripped of noise. Emily found Michael alone in the hallway, his head bowed. She said, "Why did you do it?" His voice cracked, broken under the weight of regret. He said, "I thought it would save us, but it only doomed us." Emily's tears brimmed but did not fall. She said, "You should have trusted us instead of shadows." Michael's hands shook as he pressed them against the wall, his voice raw. He said, "I cannot undo it, but I will help you finish this fight." Emily's silence was long, filled with grief and resolve. At last she said, "Then stand beside us, not behind them." The storm outside rattled the courthouse windows, echoing their fragile truce. The verdict neared, tension thrumming like a wire pulled tight. Emily's voice carried steady across the chamber. She said, "Justice is not theirs to twist. It belongs to us." Daniel's eyes burned, his fist resting firm on the table. Grace whispered, "We've brought the truth into light." Michael nodded slowly, his shame turned into resolve. He said, "I will carry this with you." Leo's voice broke through the hush, young but unshakable. He said, "We are stronger than their lies." The judge lifted his gaze, the gavel poised above the desk. The room held its breath, every heartbeat echoing in silence. Emily whispered one last vow, "No matter the words, justice lives in us." The family braced for the storm of judgment, their breaths measured like soldiers before battle. Emily whispered, "No matter what, we stand together." Daniel straightened his jacket, eyes locked forward with steel resolve. Michael said, "The weight of this is ours, but so is the truth." Grace shuffled her notes, each page trembling in her hand, though her voice remained steady. She said, "The facts will outlast their lies." Leo sat on the edge of his chair, restless but fierce, saying, "They cannot erase what we have seen." The silence of the courtroom thickened, every cough and shuffle echoing like thunder. Emily clenched her fists, her pulse drumming in her ears. She said, "This is where we take back what was stolen." Emily found her voice, sharp yet steady, slicing through the silence like a blade. She said, "For years we were told to accept lies. Today we speak the truth." The courtroom leaned forward, caught in her gravity. Daniel watched her with unshakable pride, murmuring, "She carries us all." Michael pressed his palms together, whispering, "She is stronger than any judgment." Grace's eyes filled with quiet admiration as she said, "She reclaims what they tried to silence." Leo whispered fiercely, "She speaks for all of us." The judge's gaze remained unreadable, but the weight of Emily's words rippled through the room. Emily's voice did not falter, even as her heart pounded. She said, "Justice has a voice, and it is ours." The velvet blade faltered, his composure cracking under the weight of exposure. "Richard said you cannot prove intent," his voice still smooth but strained. Daniel leaned forward, eyes sharp. He said, "Your silence proves enough." Grace set another document on the table, her tone measured. She said, "This shows your hand in every shadow." Michael's jaw clenched as he whispered, "We should have seen it sooner." Emily's voice rang clear, cutting his mask apart. She said, "Your reign of control ends here." Richard's eyes darted, his stillness betrayed by a twitch of the hand. Leo smirked with quiet defiance, saying, "Even walls remember your lies." The chamber erupted with murmurs, the power he once held crumbling. The verdict twisted into an unexpected shape, neither triumph nor defeat. The judge said, "The evidence stands, but punishment will be reduced." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Emily's face tightened, fury battling sorrow. She whispered, "This is not full justice." Daniel's jaw flexed, his voice heavy. He said, "It is more than they expected us to achieve." Grace nodded slowly, her calm laced with disappointment. She said, "The truth is on record. That cannot be erased." Michael exhaled hard, muttering, "It will never be enough." Leo's voice rose clear and stubborn. He said, "It is a start, and we will not stop here." Emily's eyes glistened, but her voice carried. She said, "We forced the world to hear us. That matters." The haunting memory finally settled, no longer a wound but a scar. Emily stood outside the courthouse, the rain now a soft drizzle. She whispered, "You can rest now," her voice directed to the memory that had followed her for years. Daniel placed his hand on her shoulder, saying, "You carried us through the fire." Michael stood beside them, his voice low. He said, "The fight will continue, but we are no longer alone." Grace lifted her face to the sky, whispering, "The storm has passed, but we keep moving forward." Leo's voice rang clear, unshaken. He said, "We own the truth now, and no one can take it back." Emily exhaled, the burden lifting from her chest. She whispered, "This is where healing begins." Dawn found the city washed thin, as if the storm had rinsed out its lies. Emily stood in the quiet kitchen, holding the letter like a truce. She said, "We are still here." Daniel exhaled, the fight easing from his shoulders without fading. He said, "What we kept was each other." Michael stared at his open hands, measuring the cost and the debt. He said, "I will spend the rest paying it down." Grace laid a folder on the table, gentle as a benediction. She said, "The record stands, and so do we." Leo traced a map of tomorrow in the condensation on glass. He said, "We build forward, not back." The house breathed, larger than before. Leo stood at the threshold, small in size, immense in choice. He said, "I am done hiding," and the room turned toward him like a compass. Emily nodded, pride and worry twined tight in her chest. She said, "We stand behind you." Daniel steadied his voice, offering a line to hold. He said, "Name the risk and we share it." Michael's eyes softened, the anchor returned to service. He said, "Your voice changes the air." Grace placed a card in Leo's palm, a lifeline of allies indoors. She said, "Call any time, day or night." Leo lifted his chin, the storm replaced by sky. He said, "Then, let them hear me." Evan waited outside the courthouse, the crowd's murmur a verdict of its own. He said, "I thought I could balance truth and favor, but the words tasted stale." Emily did not gloat, she let silence do the weighing. Daniel said, "You tipped the scale because it paid." Michael's voice carried no heat, only history. He said, "Harm remains even after apology." Grace recorded every word, the ledger finally honest. She said, "The correction is on the record." Evan's shoulders sagged as if the suit no longer fit. He said, "I will sign the retraction and face the rest." Leo watched him go and said, "Let the echo warn others." Emily returned to the place where the first fracture began. The hallway smelled of dust and old fluorescence, unchanged and yet smaller. She touched the frame of a faded photo and breathed. She said, "I carried you like a lantern and a blade." Daniel stood a step behind, guarding the quiet. He said, "You do not have to speak to be heard." Michael rested a hand against cool plaster, choosing presence over penance. He said, "We are with you." Grace waited at the bend, a harbor if needed. She said, "Take what time you want." Leo hummed a thin melody, a promise without words. The past loosened its grip. Night fell clean, and the city lights stitched a new seam across the dark. The family gathered by the window, not to chase storms, but to mark calm. Emily said, "Justice came crooked, but it came." Daniel nodded, letting the line land where it must. He said, "We shaped its path with our scars." Michael's voice was gentle, unafraid of truth. He said, "I will keep watch where I once failed." Grace closed the last folder and smiled. She said, "The record now remembers us." Leo looked at the glass and spoke for them all. He said, "Let this be the last night we need to explain." The room held one breath, and then released it.